If someone handed you £100,000 tomorrow, most people in Britain would tell you to buy a rental property. Bricks and mortar, monthly rent, someone else paying off your mortgage. It sounds almost too obvious. But what if that same £100,000, put into a boring global index fund and left alone, made you richer after 20 years? More liquid, more diversified, and completely free from tenants, boiler repairs, and tax surprises. Today, I am putting both routes through the same test. Same £100,000, same 20-year window. But this time, we are not doing the lazy version of the comparison. We are including mortgage interest, stamp duty, void months, repairs, landlord tax, refinancing costs, selling costs, and the return property adverts never show you. And there is one question I want to answer by the end. At what point does the safe property investment stop being the obvious winner? Quick but important note before we start. This is an illustrative comparison, not personal financial, tax, property, or mortgage advice. The outcome changes sharply depending on your location, mortgage rate, tax band, property choice, rental market, and what markets actually do. Always get advice that fits your own situation. Right, let's get into it. Imagine two people, Sam and Alex. Both have exactly £100,000 today. Both invest for 20 years. Neither adds another pound along the way. That keeps this comparison clean. And both want the same thing: maximum usable wealth at the end. Not the biggest house price, not the highest monthly rent, not bragging rights. Actual spendable money after costs, tax, and friction. Sam puts his money into a diversified, low-cost global equity index fund. Alex uses his money to buy a rental property. And here is the first thing most comparisons get wrong. If you simply compare annual rent with an index fund's average return, you have already reached the wrong conclusion. Because rent is revenue, it is not profit. And the property price rising is not the same as money in your pocket. So, let's start with Sam. Sam, the index fund route. Sam puts £100,000 into a diversified global equity index fund. That means thousands of companies across developed and emerging markets in one investment. Technology companies, banks, healthcare firms, manufacturers, consumer brands, the lot. No mortgage application, no tenant referencing, no boiler, no void months, no gas safety certificate, no agent ringing you at 11 p.m. because a tap is leaking. The annual cost for a low-cost global equity fund and platform might be somewhere around 0.20% to 0.35% a year, depending on the provider and fund. Now, nobody knows what global stock markets will do over the next 20 years. So to keep this honest, I am using 3 illustrative net return assumptions after ongoing fund costs. Not forecasts, not promises, just stress tests. At 5% a year after costs, Sam's £100,000 becomes roughly £265,000 after 20 years. At 7% a year after costs, it becomes roughly £387,000. And at 9% a year after costs, it becomes around £560,000. That is compounding doing the heavy lifting quietly in the background. No calls, no repairs, no refinancing, no tenant disputes. But there is an important tax point. If Sam invests through a stocks and shares ISA, any income and gains inside the ISA are generally free from UK income tax and capital gains tax. The overall ISA subscription limit is £20,000 for 2026 to 27. So Sam cannot simply put the entire £100,000 into an ISA on day one. unless some of it is already inside an ISA or transferred from another qualifying ISA. He could invest £20,000 into an ISA now and hold the rest in a taxable investment account, then move more across in future tax years as new ISA allowances become available. That means Sam's real tax outcome depends on how he structures it. But the key point is that the ISA gives him a route to compound money with much less tax drag over time. The honest downside? Global equity funds are not smooth. They can fall 20%, 30%, sometimes more. We saw major market crashes during the dot-com collapse, the 2008 financial crisis, and the COVID panic in 2020. And the advantage of an index fund only appears if Sam can stay invested through those drops, without panic selling at exactly the wrong moment. That is not a small thing. It is the whole game. Now, though, we get to Alex, because this is where the buy-to-let comparison becomes much more complicated than most people realise. Alex, the buy-to-let route. Alex has £100,000 and wants to buy a rental property. The first illusion to break is this. £100,000 does not mean Alex is investing £100,000 into property. A chunk of that money is gone before the property has even earned its first pound of rent. Let's say Alex buys a £300,000 buy-to-let property in England or Northern Ireland. He puts down a 25% deposit of £75,000. That means he takes out a £225,000 interest-only buy-to-let mortgage. For this comparison, we will use a 5% mortgage rate, not because it is the exact rate Alex would receive. Actual rates depend on loan-to-value, fees, personal circumstances, and whether Alex takes a 2 or 5 year fix, but because it gives us a clean, realistic stress test number. At 5%, mortgage interest on £225,000 costs Alex £11,250 per year, and that is before anything else. Now, stamp duty. On a £300,000 buy-to-let in England or Northern Ireland, the SDLT bill is £20,000 at current additional property rates. That is not a small admin fee. That is £20,000 that earns no rent, does not compound, and has to be recovered before Alex has really made a return. Stamp duty rules differ in Scotland and Wales, but for this comparison, we are using England and Northern Ireland. Current additional property SDLT rates apply 5% to the first £125,000, 7% from £125,001 to £250,000, and 10% from £250,001 to £925,000. Then Alex has solicitor fees, surveys, and mortgage arrangement fees. Call that another £3,000 to £5,000. Then there may be initial repairs, furniture, safety certificates, licensing or compliance work. Call that another £2,000 to £5,000 depending on the property. And Alex should still have an emergency reserve in cash for voids, repairs, insurance excesses, and the next mortgage rate shock. So this is the key difference. Sam gets to put the full £100,000 to work from day one. Alex does not. That is not unfair to property. That is real life. And it is one of the biggest advantages of investing through a fund. Transaction costs do not eat a quarter of your capital before you even begin. This is where most buy-to-let videos stop. They show you the rent coming in. They do not show you the money walking straight back out. Rent is revenue, not return. Let's assume Alex's £300,000 property produces a 6% gross yield. That means £18,000 a year in rent. On the surface, it looks brilliant. £18,000 coming in every year. But the £18,000 is not Alex's return. It is revenue. Mortgage interest takes £11,250 straight away. Then there are letting agent fees, landlord insurance, repairs, safety checks, certificates, admin, and void periods. For a sensible annual reserve, we will use roughly £3,700 to £5,600. That could include £1,200 to £1,800 for management or letting costs, £1,500 to £2,000 set aside for maintenance and repairs, £500 to £800 for insurance, certificates and administration, £500 to £1,000 for empty periods between tenants. That leaves Alex with roughly £1,150 to £3,050 a year before personal tax. And that assumes the property has a fairly ordinary year. No new roof, no major damp issue, no non-paying tenant, no expensive leasehold service charge bill, no 6-month void while the property is repaired. This is the real property calculation, not gross yield, net cash flow after the boring stuff. And then the tax system arrives. The landlord tax trap. For an individual landlord, residential mortgage interest is not usually deducted from rental income in the way most people assume. Instead, finance cost relief is generally given as a basic rate tax reduction. For 2026 to 27, that means 20% relief, subject to the detailed rules and limits.gov. So a higher rate taxpayer can end up being taxed on a rental profit that feels much bigger than the cash actually left in their bank account. The tax system sees the rent. It sees many of the allowable running costs, but it does not treat mortgage interest in the straightforward way people expect. That is why two landlords can own the exact same property and have completely different outcomes. A basic rate taxpayer owning personally may get one result. A higher rate taxpayer owning personally may get another. And a limited company is a separate calculation entirely. A company may pay corporation tax on profit, but then Alex needs to consider higher mortgage rates, accountancy costs, and the tax of taking money out through salary or dividends. There is no universal, limited company is better answer. It depends on whether Alex needs the rental income now, whether he is reinvesting it, his wider income, his tax band, and the specific mortgage deals available to him. And because this is a 20-year comparison, remember, tax rules do not sit still. Separate property income tax rates are scheduled from April 2027, 22% basic, 42% higher, and 47% additional. And finance cost relief is scheduled to move to the 22% property basic rate. That means every tax number in this video is an illustration, not a permanent rule. Now we can finally run the 20-year test. But there is a catch. There is no one correct future. So instead of pretending there is, let's run 3. Scenario 1, the middle of the road case. First, Sam. Sam's index fund grows at 7% a year after costs. After 20 years, his £100,000 is worth roughly £387,000. That is before inflation and before any tax that could apply to money outside an ISA or pension wrapper. Now Alex. Alex's £300,000 property grows at 3% a year. After 20 years, it is worth roughly £542,000. The interest-only mortgage balance is still £225,000. So Alex has gross property equity of roughly £317,000. That number looks impressive, but it is not the final answer. Alex still needs to account for estate agent fees, legal costs, mortgage refinancing costs paid over the years, major repairs, voids, and potentially capital gains tax when he sells. And he needs to add, or subtract, the real after-tax rental cash flow he kept along the way. For a higher rate taxpayer owning personally, that cash flow can be much thinner than people expect. In a middling property scenario, the final amount can land below the fund result once those frictions are included. In a strong property deal, with better rent, lower costs, and favourable tax treatment, it can beat the fund result. And that is the uncomfortable answer. There is no universal winner. The property advert shows you a house worth £542,000. The spreadsheet asks, how much of that money can you actually keep? Scenario 2. Property wins. Buy-to-let can absolutely win. Alex buys below market value. The area has strong rental demand. The yield is better than 6%. Mortgage rates are manageable when he refinances. He has low voids. He avoids major repairs. He is hands-on, knows the local market, and either has the right personal tax situation or a structure that genuinely works for him. And property prices grow more strongly than 3% a year. In that world, leverage does serious work. Alex controlled a £300,000 asset with a £75,000 deposit. The rent helped pay the costs. The property value grew on the full £300,000. And after 20 years, the buy-to-let route can outperform the index fund by a meaningful amount. That outcome is real, but it is not automatic. It is the reward for a good deal, effective financing, controlled costs, and good execution. Scenario 3. The index fund wins. Now take the opposite version. Property prices grow slowly. Mortgage rates stay higher at refinancing. Alex gets one major repair bill. The tenant leaves and the property sits empty. He is a higher rate taxpayer investing in his own name. His rental cash flow is weak after tax. Meanwhile, Sam continues holding a diversified global index fund through the good years and bad years. No one company can sink him. No one boiler can wipe out 2 years of income. No tenant can stop paying. And because the costs are lower and more transparent, Sam's money keeps compounding with far less friction. In this scenario, it is not close. Sam wins. The real power of buy-to-let. Now, to be fair to property, leverage is powerful. The real argument for buy-to-let is not just rent, it is that Alex controls a £300,000 asset with £75,000 of deposit. If house prices rise by 3% in year 1, that is £9,000 of growth on the full property value. Sam's £100,000 fund at 7% grows by £7,000 in year 1. So in a rising property market, leverage can make property look unbeatable early on. That is real. But leverage cuts both ways. If the property falls 10%, Alex loses £30,000 on paper. That is 40% of his original £75,000 deposit, before stamp duty, legal costs, or any other expenses. That is why buy-to-let is not simply a property investment with a mortgage attached. It is a leveraged investment in one local market, one property, and usually one tenant at a time. The upside can be higher, so can the stress. And then there is the cost nobody puts in the yield calculator: your time. Sam's index fund can be largely automated. He sets it up. He adds money when he can. He checks it occasionally. Maybe he spends 15 minutes a year reviewing his allocation. Alex has a property. That may mean tenant selection, referencing, agent management, maintenance calls, insurance renewals, safety certificates, rent reviews, tax returns, mortgage product switches, disputes, compliance, and eventually a sale. Even if Alex averages just 5 hours a month across the whole process, that is 60 hours a year. Over 20 years, that is 1,200 hours. What is your time worth? Because that cost is real. It just does not appear on a Zoopla yield calculation. Passive income is rarely passive. It is usually a second business wearing an investment costume. The verdict. So, which is better? For most people with £100,000 and no special property edge, a diversified global equity index fund is probably the cleaner default. It is liquid, it is diversified, it has lower visible costs, it is genuinely hands-off, and it lets you own thousands of businesses instead of making one heavily leveraged bet on one property in one location. That does not mean it is safe. Markets fall. Returns are never guaranteed, and you need the patience to stay invested when the news is ugly. But buy-to-let can still beat it. It can work brilliantly if you buy well, choose a strong rental market, keep costs under control, understand tax before you buy, have enough reserves, and are genuinely prepared to run it like a business. The mistake is not choosing index funds. The mistake is not choosing buy-to-let. The mistake is committing £100,000 before you have run the numbers based on your actual mortgage rate, your tax band, your local rental market, your repair budget, and your own time. And now, the answer to the question I asked at the start. At what point does property stop being the obvious winner? There is no universal crossover year. For a higher rate taxpayer buying personally, the index fund can catch up much earlier than people think, because buy-to-let starts with a huge stamp duty drag, then carries tax, refinancing, and selling friction. For a strong property deal with good leverage, attractive rent, and rising prices, buy-to-let can stay ahead for years. The crossover is not a fixed date. It is the output of your assumptions. And that is exactly why you should run the numbers before you fall in love with either route. If you found this useful, comment below. If you had £100,000 today, would you choose index funds, buy-to-let, or split the money between both? And what is the one number you would need to see before committing? I read every comment. And if you want the full UK money plan for £100,000, not just these two options, watch the next video. Because most people put a six-figure lump sum in the wrong place before they have even asked the right question.